Hello and welcome to another edition of the Saturdays for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. I do apologize for getting this episode to you guys later than usual. There's a confluence of traveling and I'll be moving states at some point here this summer, changing jobs and all that. So visiting family and all that. Travel kind of prevented me from recording here for a little bit, but we're back here now, fortunately. And today's lecture is going to be centered around Reconstruction. Now, you remember that in our previous lecture, I had said that in the next, in this sort of 3-lecture series here, we're going to have a piece, it's going to be, first part was contraction, then we had Reconstruction, and then next week we'll do expansion. And so last week we did contraction, the Byzantine Empire contracting. That basically went from the end of the reign of Justinian up until 717, where obviously a period of time where the empire lost a lot of land. This week we're talking about Reconstruction, where the empire kind of tries to get back on its feet. That'll take us from 717 until 843. And then next week we'll do expansion, which I think it goes up to 10 something. I can't remember exactly when, but 843 to 10 something. And so one very important thing that we will be getting into here is in this period of Reconstruction, we also have Iconoclasm. We'll talk a lot about Iconoclasm in the coming lectures here. I'm looking to try to get a guest on to talk about religious images and Iconoclasm here hopefully next week. But so the first iconoclast emperor was he was Leo III. We left off talking about him last time. He was Leo the Syrian, and he's going to reign from 717 until 741. So in the first couple of years of his reign, Constantinople comes under assault by the Arabs yet again. And this time, the city, Constantinople, was sieged from both the land side and the sea side, which is fairly common for the way the Arabs would attempt to siege the city. Now, fortunately, the Arab fleet was destroyed with Greek fire, which is kind of a common occurrence here as well. And the Arabs sent another fleet to blockade around Constantinople, but that fleet came from Africa, and when I say that, I mean like North Africa, as well as Egypt. And the thing about those fleets was that their crews were mostly Christian, and so they turncoated against the Arabs and went over to the side of Leo and the Byzantines. So the Arabs lose that fleet. And then, at that point in time, they were also sending an army, the Caliphate was also sending an army up to reinforce the besieging army at Constantinople. But after the Arab fleet was destroyed, it freed up Leo to go out, and he actually ambushes the Arab reinforcing army that's coming up. They're defeated, and the siege basically falls apart at that point in time. As well, the Byzantines also have an alliance with the Bulgars right now, and the Bulgars are trapping the Arabs between them and the walls of Constantinople. And before too long, the Arabs decide to go home. They've had enough of this particular siege. Now, Leo was under the impression that the recent misfortunes of the empire were due to God's anger with the empire over the use of religious images, or what we'll be talking a lot about here are icons. Now, an icon, this is different from a statue, and it's different from a painting. Icons are a particular style of art. There's iconography, and there are guys out there who paint icons. They're called iconographers. And I'm looking at a couple here right now in the room. And icon it's a particular artistic style of portraying usually Christ, Mary, and the saints as a use of oftentimes used in terms of prayer, to focus in prayer, or to focus on a particular person. And Leo was under the impression that these icons were actually graven images, right? In the Bible, it says that you're not supposed to worship graven images, and such as statues of pagan gods, etc. I would recommend that you guys, you should go Google religious icons, Orthodox icons, Byzantine icons, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'll try to post something on our Instagram page here in a little while, so that you can go check out and just see exactly what I'm talking about. But so Leo was under the impression that because the Byzantines, in his mind, were worshiping idols, that God was punishing them for this. And so Leo decided to come up with this new movement, which was called Iconoclasm, which essentially means icon smashing. Now, opponents of iconoclasm say that people are not worshiping the icons. So the idea here is that people aren't worshiping the person portrayed in the icon, that they're worshiping the very icon, the little bit of wood and painting that you hold there. And that's not the case when it comes to icons. If you have an icon of Jesus in your house, you're not worshiping the physical icon that's there in the house. You're worshiping Jesus who's in the picture. If you're venerating an icon of Mary in your house or in your church or whatever, you're not worshiping the piece of wood that icon is painted on. You're venerating Mary, and you're using the physical painting there, the physical icon there, to focus your prayer on that. Now, iconoclasm, it's important to note here that it never really caught on with the peasantry, with the common Byzantine citizens, because a large part of this is because most people back then were illiterate. They couldn't read and write, and so they didn't learn they didn't get their faith formation through books and reading and writing. They got their faith formation through pictures. And icons were one thing that people grew up. Their parents would have taught them about Jesus and Mary and the Bible and all this, using icons, pictures as an aid, because again they can't read, they can't write, so they can't read the Bible. Iconoclasm really is only popular among some people in the nobility and the military. You do get some iconoclast bishops who will come up later on. There are some members of the clergy who are iconoclast, but they are, I would say, in the minority, from everything I can gather. And so in 730, Leo officially bans icons, but then the next year, the Pope declares iconoclasm a heresy. And I should note as well, I don't know if I mentioned this, I might have just said this, it may be slipping my mind, but iconoclasm never catches on in the West. Western Catholicism, iconoclasm never really gains any. It doesn't show up there. So in 733, Leo sends a fleet to Rome to arrest the Pope for his opposition to his decree of iconoclasm, but the fleet gets shipwrecked in a storm. So Leo then, in a way to try to make up for his failed attempt to arrest the Pope, confiscates some land from the Pope, some estates that the previous emperors had given to the Pope in Sicily. Leo confiscated those. And then in 741, Leo dies in bed after he does successfully stave off a number of attacks against the empire. However, this iconoclasm issue is going to continue rearing its ugly head for a very long time. It's going to be very divisive within the empire. It's going to be a big waste of time sideshow. But Leo did view his increasing victories against the popery of enemies of the empire as divine approval for his iconoclasm, which obviously would not really be the case, but that's how he viewed it. So then Leo III is followed by Constantine the Fifth, his son. Now, Constantine the Fifth was challenged immediately by a guy named Artavasdes, who was the count of the Opsian theme. It's that theme there in southeastern Anatolia, very popular, very powerful, and as well very rebellious. And Constantine the Fifth is initially kicked off the Byzantine throne by this rebellion, but after a somewhat short civil war, he does return to power, and he has Artavasdes and all of his sons blinded, so they can no longer challenge him for imperial power, in no small part. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but if you are physically mutilated, you are not allowed, basically, to sit on the imperial throne. Justinian II was able to overcome that because he had his nose slit, but that's really the exception, not the rule. And so Constantine realized that the Optian theme was becoming too powerful and too rebellious. Obviously, we've kind of been talking about this. And so he takes steps to break up the Optian theme. And so one thing he does is he creates a new permanent field army, fairly elite, called Tagmata. And basically he took the army, again, the themes have armies which are stationed in the themes to protect that area, and the soldiers live on the land there. Part of the issue with that is that, if you need to extract it, have an army move from one area to another, those guys are settled down in those areas, so it becomes more difficult. And so part of what Constantine is doing here is he's trying to break up the Optian theme to make to stave off rebellions, but it's also good to have a professional field army, and you can send them all around to wherever you need them when the time comes. And so with this Tagmata, half of them are a permanent field army, and then the other half are stationed in Constantinople as a garrison. And this is the first time since the institution of the thematic reforms that you get a permanent field army, or at least that I've read about here. Now, Constantine the Fifth, like his father, was also an iconoclast, so he was against the veneration of people in the icons, to be very specific about the language. Though Constantine was not as passionate about his father on this issue. However, he calls a church council of basically iconoclast bishops to affirm iconoclasm, basically getting a bunch of guys together in a room and they all agree on it, and then you can say, oh, look, it's fine, see, all the bishops said it was okay, but you didn't invite any bishops who disagreed with this position. In 765, Constantine gets annoyed with all of the iconophiles, and so an iconoclast is someone who is icon smashing against icons, and so then iconophile, the suffix phile means like lover of something, right? Like a Francophile is someone who likes French language and culture. Iconophile is someone who likes icons. And so Constantine, being an iconoclast, is annoyed by all the iconophiles who are in his imperial court and beyond, and he rounds up a number of them, and some of them are killed, such as a monk named Stephen. And Constantine really took issue with a lot of monks because monks were very strongly iconophiles. They're pro-icons. And Constantine begins confiscating the property of many monasteries and even persecuting some of them, as well as convents and nuns as well. So both religious brothers and sisters, both religious brothers and sisters are very pro-icon, and so Constantine begins to crack down on that. And then there is also a plot of iconophiles against Constantine, a plot to take him out and replace him with a different emperor, which was foiled. And Constantine then had those conspirators round up and executed, and some of them were also blinded, which is not, that's typically what's done with rebellions and foiled conspiracies against emperors. You really have to do that. You sort of don't have a choice in it. But the whole ordeal creates a lot of tensions between iconoclasts and iconophiles, which is something the Byzantines really can't afford to do because they have enemies on every border, every front that they have. It's really a waste of time to be fighting amongst yourselves over this issue of icons, which is a very silly idea. People who have icons in their house are not worshiping the piece of wood in their house that the icon is painted on, right? It's used as a reminder of Christ, Mary, and the saints. It's not something, I don't believe that the icons that are hanging in my house have any kind of divine power. In 775, in one of the many campaigns against the Bulgars, Constantine fell ill and died. And he became so unpopular with his subjects, and this is largely over his iconoclasm, that they dubbed him the Name of Dung. He was Constantine, the Name of Dung. So not exactly a popular guy here. And can't blame him, because when you go around bullying a bunch of monks and nuns, not exactly the most magnanimous approach to take to governance. And so next up we get Irene. Now you will notice Irene really comes to power here in 780. So there's a little 5-year gap here before, there's various palace intrigues. One guy attacks another guy, and there's short civil wars, and they fight battles against each other. But skipping over all of that, Irene, I think, is kind of an interesting character. So she's around, effectively ruling from 780 until 802. Part of that is her in a position of as a regent for her young son, after she possibly poisoned her husband. And then part of that is her ruling by herself as empress. So, as I said, Irene initially is ruling as regent for her son, who's Constantine the Sixth, but she kind of has some other plans about these things. Now, the important thing to remember about Irene is that she's an iconophile, and she had built a lot of alliances with other iconophiles in the imperial court and elsewhere. So she has a lot of friends in the imperial court, in the clergy, around the empire, because again, iconoclasm is not really taking off as a popular thing, especially among the people and the clergy. There are some members of the clergy who are iconoclasts, but it's certainly not the majority. And really, the place where iconoclasm has the strongest presence is going to be in some parts of the nobility, some parts of the imperial courts, and the military. And so, and what really impresses me about Irene here is that she has this political power, she has this influence, and she knows how to wield it effectively. She has a particular goal in mind, and she uses her position of power, her position of political power as the regent and later the empress, to try to box out the iconoclasts and make moves to put iconophiles in positions of power to try to keep the iconoclasts out of power. So one example here is that in 784, the Patriarch of Constantinople dies, and Irene replaces him with an iconophile Patriarch. Treadgold's text doesn't necessarily, I don't believe it says that the previous Patriarch was an iconoclast, but considering the last couple of emperors were iconoclasts, it would make sense that they would be. And so the Patriarch who she replaces him with is an iconophile. So here we have, this is the most important religious position in the Byzantine Empire, and so she's using her position of political power to push a particular goal here, which is to box out the iconoclasts. And then that Patriarch immediately called for a church council to condemn iconoclasm. I'm sure he and Irene would have had a conversation beforehand where that might have been talked about. I would imagine that she would say, hey, we really think that once you're in power, we need you to call a council here and try to stomp out this iconoclast problem. And I'm sure he agreed with her, and that's partly why he would have gotten that position. Then in 788, Irene chose a young bride for her son, whom he apparently didn't really like. She's described as very pretty, but apparently Constantine was not that into her. And this creates some resentment between Irene and Constantine, which we will see coming up here is kind of, there is some resentment going on here between Irene and her son. Now, soon after Constantine the Sixth comes into power, he gets overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being emperor. And so he brings his mother back as basically a co-emperor or co-empress, co-rulers, to help him out. which is a pretty weak move. That's not showing strength. That's not operating from a position of strength here. And then in 797, soldiers loyal to Irene captured Constantine the Sixth and blinded him, making Irene the sole ruler of the empire. Again, here Constantine the Sixth shows weakness, shows that he's not capable of doing the job, and when you're in a weak position like this, especially when you're sitting on the imperial throne, a lot of people want to sit on the imperial throne. So everyone's got there's a target on your back, and if you show any weakness, you're done. You're not going to have a lot of time left. And now this raised another issue because Irene now is the only ruler in the Byzantine Empire. And Irene, obviously, is a woman's name, so she's an empress, not an emperor. Although I hate to assume Irene's gender. Maybe I shouldn't do that for YouTube censorship purposes. But in the world at the time, Irene was not considered the emperor because she was a woman. And so therefore, in 800, the Pope coronated Charlemagne Imperator Romanorum, or Emperor of the Romans, because it was seen that the imperial Roman throne, because again, the way the Byzantine Empire is viewed in this time period is not the Byzantine Empire. It's viewed as the Roman Empire. It's just smaller. They didn't call themselves Byzantines. They called themselves Romans, and they believed that the emperor there in Constantinople was sitting on the same throne that Justinian sat on, and that Constantine sat on, and that Augustus and Trajan and Hadrian and all those guys, it's the same throne, it's the same position. But now it's viewed as, the seat is empty. Dare I say, sede vacantis, right? They view the seat as being empty. And so the Pope gives Charlemagne the imperial title because he's being coordinated by the Pope, and he's the only man who might be eligible for the position. But this move seriously offended the Byzantines because they view, the imperial title is for the person who sits in Constantinople. It's not supposed to be given to some Frankish barbarian, often, Germania or Francia or wherever they're from. And so Charlemagne, in actually a fairly intelligent political move here, wanted to make amends, and he does this by offering to marry Irene. So basically, you would have this new kind of empire in the west uniting with an empire in the east, which would have been very interesting to see what would have happened with this. But during the time when Irene was considering, should I accept this or should I not accept it, she was kidnapped by enemy partisans and basically sent off to live in a monastery. She died a convent, and she died a few years later. So she didn't even have an opportunity to tell Charlemagne yes or no. And she was replaced by a general named Nicephorus. Now, this is not Nicephorus Phocas. So I accidentally, when I was reading this, I was like, oh yes, Nicephorus Phocas, I remember him. Different guy. I believe this is Nicephorus the First. The Nicephorus Phocas, I believe, is Nicephorus the Second. But so, Nicephorus the First planned to expand the empire in the European theater. When you're talking about the Byzantine, there's the Asian theater or the Anatolian theater, where they're fighting the Arabs. And then you also have the European theater, where they're fighting against the Bulgars and the Slavs. Not so much the Avars anymore. But so in 804, the Byzantine army retakes the western part, I believe it's the eastern part of the Peloponnesus. And then in 807, the Byzantine army pushes all the way up to Serdica, which is modern Sofia in Bulgaria, the modern city of Sofia. So they push all the way up there. So they're getting a good amount of land back there in Europe, in Greece, and the Balkans, and Thrace. Then, after that's done, Nicephorus issues an edict, not an edict, he issues a census. I wrote down the wrong word in my notes here. And so the census brought an end to years of tax evasion schemes, basically, people lying about like how many people are living in their house or how much produce their land is yielding, that kind of stuff. And this brings in a much-needed stream of revenue for the empire because, obviously, as we know, having just lost well over half the empire's land at this point in time, that's going to put a serious hurt on your revenue. And so this is a good new influx of revenue that's created by Nicephorus's census here. And then 809, he's also going to create several new themes established in Greece and Thrace in order to get some governance going on in these areas, which had been out of Byzantine control for quite a while at this point in time, several decades. Then in 809 as well, we see the beginning of a couple of conflicts here between the Bulgars and the Byzantines. That's nothing new. It's going to happen a lot more as time goes on here. And though the Byzantines see a good deal of early success in this conflict, it ends with Nicephorus being killed in battle, along with much of his army that got trapped in a ravine. And the Bulgar Khan, whose name was Krum, he takes the skull of Nicephorus and turns it into a goblet to drink out of, which is... part of me is like, that's kind of gross. That doesn't sound very sanitary. And another part of me is like, that's kind of a Chad move, Like that's pretty hardcore, drinking from the skull of your enemy. You can leave in the comments what you think of that. But so then, of course, this is going to lead to another imperial vacancy, and so then we get Leo the Fifth, who comes to power after Nicephorus. Nicephorus had a son who was paralyzed, who was basically he was, as soon as Nicephorus died, his son was put on the imperial throne, but it was kind of understood that he wasn't going to last very long. He was going to die soon. He wasn't really capable of doing a whole lot because of his disability, especially back then. Yeah, obviously nowadays, fortunately, people with disabilities like that can do a lot more, and oftentimes, medical technology allows people to, paralyzed people become unparalyzed, fortunately now. But back then, it was basically a death sentence. And then it did also briefly pass to Nicephorus' son-in-law before Leo comes in and seizes the throne. And now Leo was fairly non-confrontational with the Bulgars and their Khan, who's Krum. And he leaves Krum to basically... rampages through Thrace a lot, doing a lot of raiding. And there was a point in time when Leo attempted to have Krum assassinated. Basically what happened was he set up a staged negotiation for a peace treaty, and during those negotiations he had guys attempt to kill Krum, and that didn't work out. And he was very offended by that, and so that led to several more years of Bulgar raiding in Thrace and the Balkans. Then in 815, Leo believed that the empire's bad luck against the Bulgars was due to icons, because at this point in time, especially due to the political effectiveness of Irene, iconoclasm had kind of waned, and icons were kind of on the comeback. So Leo thought that the bad luck he had had, the misfortunes they had had against the Bulgars was due to this revival of iconophiles and use of icons. And so he thought that smashing icons would have helped him. Now Leo does manage to defeat the Bulgars in battle and to secure a peace treaty, which he then attributed to divine approval for the icon smashing, which is obviously not the case. And then he does some work to reorganize territories which are exchanged as a result of that peace treaty, right? The Bulgars give some territories back to the Byzantines give some territories to the Bulgars. And one thing that I thought was fairly interesting was that he organized a new theme in northeastern Anatolia, right along the coast there and right at the Bosphorus, which was supposed to protect against raids from the Rus. And this is one of the earlier mentions of the Kievan Rus, which is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Russian state. And in 820, Leo was assassinated. And we get several incompetent emperors after that, and they have very short reigns, and they lose control of Byzantine Sicily, and they also lose control of Crete. See how we're doing on time. Oh, good. This may be a little bit of a shorter lecture, but that's okay sometimes. All right, and then the last issue, the last emperor we're talking about today, is a guy named Theophilus. Now, Theophilus was another iconoclast emperor, and he also faced a major Arab invasion early in his reign, but it was called off at the last minute because the caliph died, the caliph being the leader of the caliphate. And so with the caliph dying there, he was going to lead the invasion, and so last minute they call it off because, they have to reorganize and all that. During the reign of Theophilus, we also see a heretical group of Muslims called the Kurmites flee the caliphate, and they flee to the Byzantine Empire, and they convert to Christianity, which is a good bonus. Some of these as well would have been, skilled light horsemen, skilled light cavalrymen, which is very useful in fighting the Arabs because one of the strengths of the Arabs is excellent light cavalry. Now, early luck led Theophilus to believe that iconoclasm, again, had divine. We see this now with each of these three emperors who we've talked about who are iconoclasts. It's that they had something went well for them early in their reign, which they viewed as as some sort of approval from God for their iconoclasm, which usually just leads them to ramp up the iconoclasm, which then often leads them to have less success and become less popular because most of the people in the empire are iconophiles. But because of Theophilus is under the impression that he's in God's favor, he plans a major raid into the caliphate, which results with the Arabs hitting them back twice as hard. And during the counterattack, a number of the Kurmites, who, again, as we just said, left the caliphate for Byzantium, rebelled against the Byzantines. Trudgold says it's about 30,000. Now, this rebellion was eventually put down in 840, and then Theophilus dies 2 years later of dysentery. And the rest of his reign, there's some things in there where he does like some administrative reforms that I don't really think are worth spending a whole lot of time on here in this setting. But that takes us to about 840, and again, the last period of expansion is going to we have it starting in 843, so I think this is a good cutoff for us before we move into the period of expansion. So that was the period of Reconstruction, where again the Byzantines pick up some more territories, they get some more revenue. The empire is pretty secure at this point in time. There aren't a lot of there are Arab raids into the empire, but that's nothing new. That's nothing out of the ordinary. That's happening all the time. And the way the themes have been set up, it's in a way that they're very well equipped to deal with this sort of thing. Sorry if you can hear that water bottle getting screwed in, the cap of the bottle. But anyway, so thank you for listening here today. If you've made it this far in the video, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. We surpassed 2,000 views for the whole channel across all videos, and then we have also surpassed 100 subscribers, so I want to say thank you. That's really awesome. You guys, we're doing a great job here. You guys are in helping to expand and grow the channel, so I really appreciate that. Please continue sharing, liking, subscribing, commenting. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Play, thank you guys for listening as well. Please make sure to give us a follow there. And especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please make sure to give us a 5-star review. Definitely really helps the channel. You can also check out our Instagram account, which is Professor Wren, where I post updates about the show, and as well as, like I said, I'm going to try to I'll post a picture of an icon so that you guys who've maybe never seen one can get an idea of what it looks like. It's really nice artwork. But that's all I have for you today. And again, thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.